We're bringing it back on March 31st. So cereal night's coming back on March 31st. We will probably be serving/eating outside, but cereal night on March 31st is coming. So literally, you don't need to bring anything. You just show up ready to eat a bunch of cereal and maybe drink some milk. And if I remember right, last year, this is when all of you started giving me the hardest time in the world on how I say M-I-L-K, milk. What was the other thing that you guys pointed out that I always do? What was that? No. There was a phrase that I say that you like. I don't remember what the phrase is. Yeah, in theory. That was the one that you guys just like ripped me apart for too. Was in theory. Yahoos. All right, Daniel, can you pray for us while I get ready?
Father God, thanks for tonight, Lord. We just thank you for this time of fellowship, Lord, and coming together, Lord. Help us to learn something new about you tonight, and bless this time together in your name and with your name, in Jesus.
Awesome. Apparently, I need to do music stand because this keeps happening. All right, so tonight we are beginning a conversation called Faith in an Anxious World. So, as we officially hit the 1-year mark of COVID and the craziness that has been 2020 now leading into 2021, I figured now is the perfect time to have a little conversation about anxiety and mental health. So when I was your age, growing up in church, mental health was not a subject that was ever talked about. But it is something that shouldn't be taboo, even if we think it's something we can't talk about in public. So the goal for the next month or so is to kind of normalize the conversation. So to start off, I have a video that I want us to watch.
Calm down, you're fine. And then you just keep saying that faster and faster. I should not be this worried about it.
It gave me a lot of anxiety not knowing what to even do in high school.
Stress is a normal part of life when we are under pressure in new and demanding circumstances. That's a good thing because it helps us adapt when it matters most. There are many reasons why we may feel a little bit of anxiety in today's world. Anxiety is one of the emotions that doesn't feel great, like sadness or anger or fear. Anxiety is unpleasant, but it plays an important role in our lives. We are going to feel anxiety from time to time in our lives, but we don't have to feel anxious about feeling anxious. Everyone experiences anxiety.
Yes. Oh, yes.
I do feel anxious.
I'm anxious all the time.
I think just the overall pressure to do very well in a lot of different categories.
Homework.
For AP classes, for honors and all that.
Once that test comes in front of me, everything blanks and I'm like, oh gosh.
Reading out loud in class.
Getting ready for college.
Did you get in? Have you sent the things? And
Accumulates and it's stress. These relationships can cause a lot of anxiety.
Making friends.
Relationship with parents.
social media, I blame myself too. We put the best parts of ourselves on social media. And if you spend a lot of time looking at that and kind of indoctrinating yourself that that's how life is, then you kind of blame yourself for a lot of the bad things that happen.
Well, a lot of people were very competitive with each other.
You want to have this certain body, or you want to have this certain amount of money.
Growing up, I definitely didn't have a lot of the things that I wanted. The things that I wore, or even school supplies.
I was up all night trying to think, is this the right thing to wear? What do freshmen wear?
I had a ton of acne on my face, and I felt like nobody else did in my school, and especially my friend group. I felt like that's all that people were looking at.
I just have really racing thoughts. My thoughts just move really quickly to all the different fears.
And a lot of times it's not even something that would happen, it's just your anxious brain just coming up with scenarios.
It's everything's closing in on you, and you can't do anything that you're worried about what's gonna happen.
If anyone talks to me, it kind of goes in one ear and out the other. I just focus on what I'm anxious about, and I can't think about anything else.
Sometimes that can affect your physical body. You can have a hard time breathing.
You're like breathing, I guess, like kind of like bottles up and it freaks you out.
I just can't breathe. I can't get a full breath in.
Sometimes it's like my chest is tight. Other times it's like I'm burning a hole in my stomach.
If you feel like you're on a roller coaster and it's like right when you're at the very, very top and you feel like your stomach is like up in your chest and you're like about to fall.
Having 1,000 cups of coffee in your body, which you can imagine is a little much.
A little more sweaty than usual. You don't want anyone to notice, and you kind of just think that everyone's looking at you and you're a weirdo and no one's gonna like you because you're freaking out.
That's kind of what it feels like, at least for me.
It's really hard to explain.
I, for a long time, felt like I was the only one who felt that way. And when I started talking to my friends about it, they were like, oh, I actually feel the same way.
Like, a lot of people deal with that problem.
I mean, I know, at least with me and my friends, we would all experience it, and we just talk about it a little bit, like what's going on, like what we're worried about.
Saying what is making me anxious already feels better. Just put it out there. Just use what words you can, and you guys can just start talking about it. Because if you keep it inside, it just gets worse and worse and worse, and it gets bigger and bigger. But again, if you say it out loud, it's not as scary.
A lot of people go through it. As cheesy as it sounds, you're not alone. A lot of people have anxiety.
So tonight is going to be the start of a month of serious conversations. So do me a favor, while you're here for these conversations, keep the phone in your pocket, keep the chatter to a minimum next to you, because this is going to be a serious conversation for the next month. And chances are, everyone in this room at some point or other will either suffer from anxiety or maybe even has anxiety in the here and the now. The stats before the pandemic about you teenagers were that 7 out of 10 of you currently were dealing with some sort of anxiety. And that was before the pandemic. So I can only imagine that in the midst of the pandemic, what that may have done to people's anxiety. The stat that's come out since the pandemic has started is that 1 out of 4 teenagers have contemplated suicide. And so if that's true in this room, there's probably, if we were to do the math, 5 to 6 teenagers in this room in theory, if the ratio goes right, that at one point during quarantine and the crazy part of the pandemic thought about suicide. And what I want us to do for the next month is figure out how to live as Christians in an anxious world and how to live life in an anxious world. And if I could get you to remember one thing from tonight, and only one thing from tonight, it would be this idea, that God is with us in our most anxious moments. That God is with us in our most anxious moments. Anxiety is normal, and it is something that we absolutely need to talk about. Which leads to the question, though, where is God when I feel anxious? So when we're feeling anxious, where exactly is God in the midst of it? So as we go into this conversation, though, I need to put a couple of things on the table. So I talk about all the time that this room, St. Andrew's Youth Ministry, is a safe place for any and everyone. You can belong before you believe, and that what is said here stays here. That is true except for 2 things. The only things that we will ever share outside of this room, and it goes to your parent or guardian or maybe somebody else, would be if you come up and tell one of the adults in the room that you are thinking about hurting yourself, we have to tell someone. If you are thinking about hurting somebody else, we have to tell someone. That is just the rules and the way it works for your safety, for their safety, and to actually help you get the help that you need. If it involves harm of self or harm of others, that cannot and will not stay in this room. Now, that also means, though, if you're not actually ready to tell your parents whatever might be going on in your head and your soul, because you're afraid of how they will react, we will walk with you through that. And so, if it's obviously something that involves hurting somebody or hurting yourself, the timetable on that is a little bit rushed. But if it's something else that you're not quite ready to tell your parents, we will walk with you every step of the way as you get ready to tell your parents or guardian or whoever else it is that you feel you need to tell what is ever going on in your heart, in your soul. And so that is my promise to you, is that it is safe, and part of what makes it safe is that if it's anything about harm of self or harm of others, we have to go to battle with that. We have to work through that. So in your Bible, do me a favor and turn to Mark chapter 6. Mark chapter 6. We're going to look at a couple of stories of Jesus tonight, where Jesus meets his disciples in the midst of anxiety. So the first one is in Mark chapter 6, verse 45. Mark chapter 6, verse 45. And this may be a story if you grew up in Sunday school, if you grew up in church, you've probably heard before where Jesus walks on water. But I want us to take a look at it from a different perspective tonight. So, Mark chapter 6, verse 45 says this. Immediately, Jesus made his disciples get into the boat and go before him to the other side, to Bethsaida. While Jesus dismissed the crowd, and after he had taken leave of them, he went up on the mountain to pray. And when evening came, the boat was out on the sea, and he was alone on the land. And he saw that they were making headway painfully, for the wind was against them. And about the fourth watch of the night, so the middle of the night, Jesus came to them walking on the sea. He meant to pass by them, but when they saw him walking on the sea, they thought it was a ghost, and they cried out, for they all saw him and were terrified. But immediately Jesus spoke to them and said, "Take heart, it is I. Do not be afraid." And Jesus got into the boat with them, and the wind ceased, and they were utterly astonished. One of the things that I love and notice about Jesus' actions in this story is that Jesus starts off with his walk steady, and the story kind of even hints that Jesus intended to pass by the boat. That Jesus didn't intend to actually stop. He was just going out for a leisurely stroll on the water. Then he encountered his disciples in the boat freaking out in the midst of a storm, and he stops. He doesn't walk past them. He stops. He gets into their wobbly, unsteady, rocky boat, and he steps into it with them. He doesn't ignore them in the midst of their anxiousness, but rather when life is unsteady with them, Jesus takes the time to meet the disciples where they're at. In the Bible has many, many stories of this throughout the Bible. If you go all the way back to the book of Genesis, Abraham was going to, because God told him to, he was going to sacrifice his firstborn son. I can only imagine what was going through his head in that. And then in the midst of that, God shows up and provides a ram. We have Moses, who was a stutterer, who was told that he was supposed to lead his people out of Israel, but he said, "I'm not worthy, I'm not capable of this, I don't know how to do this, I can't speak to people," and God showed up to him in the midst of that. There's all kinds of other stories where that happens. And even for our disciples, this one story in Mark is not the only time this ever happened. So flip back a couple of chapters to Mark chapter 4. One of the things I love about the disciples, and that entertains me about the disciples and how normal it is the disciples encounter the same thing over and over, and Jesus does something powerful and miraculous and crazy, and the next time that same situation happens, the disciples still freak out. So Mark 6 is the result of them after seeing Jesus already do something crazy before and solve their problem. They still don't understand exactly who or what Jesus is. So in Mark chapter 4, verse 35, we read this. On that day, when evening had come, Jesus said to them, "Let us go across to the other side." And leaving the crowd, they took him with them in the boat, just as he was. And other boats were with him. And a great windstorm arose, and the waves were breaking into the boat, so that the boat was already filling. So in other words, at this point, the boat is starting to sink because it is flooding with water. Verse 38. But he was in the stern, asleep on the cushion. The boat is sinking, and Jesus is taking a nap. I absolutely love it. And they woke him and said to him, "Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing?" And he awoke and rebuked the wind and said to the sea, "Peace, be still." And the wind ceased, and there was great calm. He said to them, "Why are you so afraid? Have you still no faith?" And they were filled with great fear and said to one another, "Who then is this that even the wind and the sea obey him?" So, yet again, in the midst of all of this time Jesus is already in the actual boat, but Jesus is in the midst of their anxiousness, in the midst of their chaos, and he is there with utter peace and stillness, showing them a different way to handle things. Jesus takes his calm and stillness into the anxiety of his friends. And I think that's super important, that Jesus, he could have reacted 100 different ways, but instead, he reacts calmly and enters into the anxiety of his friends. He doesn't leave them alone in the midst of their anxiety, but he is with them. And their response in both stories is the same. They don't understand what Jesus is doing or how Jesus has the power that he actually does. And so often in my own life, that is how I react to Jesus. Jesus does one thing in my life, the situation comes up again, and I still don't quite understand how Jesus works, and I freak out. And so, we have a lot of things that could make our boats feel unsteady. Daniel, you can grab these for me. So I want everybody to grab a piece of paper and a pen, and I'm going to do a little exercise for us. So as Daniel is handing out the pens and paper, I want you to start thinking about this question on the screen. In 2021, there's probably a lot of different things that could make our boat feel unsteady. What we're going to do when you get that pen and piece of paper is we're going to list out all the ways that you can think of that your boat, your life is feeling unsteady. So start thinking through that question as you get a pen and piece of paper, and then I'm going to set a timer for 2 minutes for us to go through as you get your pen and piece of paper. So all you need is that blank piece of paper. Don't worry about whatever on the other side of that blank piece of paper. It is not important. There's definitely another pen somewhere. All right, Daniel, we need a new pen over there. All right, so I'm going to set my timer for 2 minutes. So start writing down, staying quiet. So what is making your boat unsteady? So maybe you're in a season where school is completely stressful and driving you nuts. Maybe you're in a season where sports or your extracurricular activities are feeling daunting and you just can't deal with it. Maybe you're in a season where your parents' relationship, their divorce, their separation, their fighting, their arguing is stressing you out to no end. Maybe you're in a season where you have a loved one that has gotten sick with cancer or some other terminal illness and you just can't shake the feeling. Maybe you're in here and you've had a friend for years, and that friend, for whatever reason, you and them now just can't see eye to eye, and you are wondering where exactly that friendship is supposed to go. So write down whatever you are feeling and thinking that is making your boat unsteady, and then I will move us on in about 90 seconds. These lists are for no one but yourself. So you're not going to show this to anybody, but in a couple minutes we're going to come back to these lists. So hold on to these lists. And the idea behind this is that it helps show that we all feel anxious. Everybody feels anxious. And anxiousness is that knot in your stomach or that nagging fear when you face a challenge. It's our body's natural response to stress or pressure. Anxiety in itself is not bad. Everyone experiences anxiety, and you are not alone in your anxiety. No one is alone in their anxiety. In fact, I am right there with you in the midst of anxiety. So if I wrote a list tonight, some of the things at the top of the list that I would have wrote down at the top of the list of what is making my boat unsteady right now would be the idea of finances and jobs. Currently, we are going through a financial and job transition, and it's anxious to figure out what God's going to do in the midst of that. I'm anxious just about life and family stuff in general right now. It's been over a year since I've seen any of my family, and I'm just ready to see my family. At the same time, not because of COVID, but in general, the COVID season we're in, I am anxious about health. Tomorrow I am getting my COVID vaccine, and it hit me tonight a little bit that I'm a little anxious to see how my body is going to respond to that COVID vaccine in the morning. Anxiousness can take all kinds of different forms in different ways. Anxiety can feel like a problem, and sometimes it is a problem, but anxiety in itself exists to tell us something important. It may be even telling us that something is wrong, or that we are in danger. It might be telling us that our bodies need sleep, or food, or rest, or whatever else it might be. The key is learning to listen to our anxiety, and not letting our anxiety control us. So you hear me talk about it all the time. I am wired as an individual, my personality, that rather than sit in pain or sit in anxiety, I want to seek out new experiences and do other things that are fun so I don't have to think about what is bad. If I constantly just run from my anxiety and whatever I'm fretful about, I never get a chance to process it or learn what is up to in the midst of it. And instead, if I ignore my anxiety and ignore my pain, that can develop into a way worse problem a few months down the line. And so, remember, our big idea is this. God is with us in the midst of our most anxious moments. God is with us in the midst of our most anxious moments. So now I want you to go back to that list. I'm going to give you another 2 minutes. And what I want you to do this time is I want you to answer these questions right here. So in 2 minutes, think through and process that list in light of these 2 questions. Where is God at work in the midst of my anxiety? What might God or anxiety might be trying to tell me about maybe schedule and pressure you're under, times when you're beyond your comfort zone, whether you're eating and sleeping enough, whether you're putting yourself in dangerous situations. So take the next 2 minutes, process your list in light of those questions. Where is God at work in the midst of your anxiety? So if you didn't finish answering, that is okay. But when anxiety comes in and takes control, often it can make us feel unsteady. And we try different ways to get rid of that unsteady feeling. So these are called coping strategies. So the ways we try to get our anxiety or these bad feelings to go away are coping strategies. And coping strategies are simply everything we do to try to get rid of, reduce, or tolerate stress. So, for instance, one of my coping strategies, and I did it Sunday in the midst of a long, stressful day when I was here at church all day, is I get munchy, and rather than making healthy food decisions, I go and spend $10 on the value menu at Taco Bell, because in theory, it makes me feel better. Or I'll go and find the sweetest, most unhealthy snack in the world I could get, because in theory, I feel like if I eat something delicious, it will make me feel better. But that doesn't necessarily work. And while my indulgence is a minor form of a coping strategy that has some negative side effects to it, but nothing crazy, because some coping strategies could be alcohol or drugs, or porn, or self-harm. Like, coping strategies can have crazy negative side effects. But anxiety in itself doesn't have to take us down a dangerous path. So when I'm comfortable and when I'm doing what I should be doing as a human being close to Jesus, confident in myself and my mental health, instead of going and stress eating Taco Bell, I'll either go for a adequate run or exercise, or I'll talk to my wife or talk to my friends, talk to my family, or actually have a conversation with God about my anxiety in my stress, rather than eating crazy amounts of unhealthy Taco Bell that may or may not be real food. And so, in our anxiety, we can learn about who we are, what situations make us feel unsteady, and what healthy coping strategies work for us. We can use our power to make changes when situations in our life cause us to feel tense. We can recognize where God is present and at work in our rocking boat. We can practice listening to God so that we can experience and share that peace with others. Do any of you in here enjoy gardening yet? Do any of your parents enjoy gardening?
Yes.
Okay, so gardening involves cultivating and planting and watering. It takes work to grow a garden. You can't just throw plants in the ground and assume by planting them they are going to live. Chances are, if you never cultivate that garden or deal with that garden, the plants are going to die, even if it's a cactus. And yes, I killed a cactus this summer. If you don't care for your garden, it is going to die. Our mental health, our peace and tranquility with God, we have to cultivate it and work on it. We can't just assume that if we don't deal with our anxious thoughts, that they are going away or we're going to process them well. So if you think back to the stories that we read tonight from the Gospel of Mark, there's something crucial about the way Jesus operates in this. And Jesus did not travel alone. And if you track Jesus throughout the Gospels, very rarely does Jesus travel alone. Jesus, in some form or fashion, usually travels with his 12 disciples and the group of women who was around him at the same time. He had a close circle of people who he was constantly walking with. So over the next couple of weeks, as we talk about this anxiety and how we deal with it in faith in an anxious world, I want to make these conversations normal. One of the ways that we do that is we have public conversations like this, and we get comfortable talking about our feelings and emotions inside groups. And there's going to be three ways that we kind of process this. It is the idea of look up, look inside, and then look around. Look up, look inside, and look around. So the idea of look up means that we pause in the midst of our anxious thoughts to look up and seek God's wisdom through the Bible and talk to others who are walking in faith. That's going to be a large part of what we do here for the next month. Then look inside is the idea that we think and reflect on where God is at work inside of us. So kind of like that exercise I had you do looking at your anxiety, the question that we need to ask ourselves constantly is, where is God at work in the midst of this? And then the idea of look around is that we take a good look at our own anxious world so that we can make peace and share it. Life is going to be crazy. 2020 has taught us nothing except we cannot expect or fully know what is ever going to happen on a given day. And the only way we can fully deal with our anxiousness is just by understanding that we can't control what we can't control, and we have to look around us, invite Jesus into it, to make peace and share it. And so, as we look up together, we're going to learn to have a conversation together, and I want to give you different spiritual practices to kind of combat this. So tonight, as we close, there's a video that I want you to see that's going to explain it, and then I will tell us what we're going to do next.
The daily replay. A helpful way to pray.
The daily replay helps you reflect as you rewind through your day.
As you rewind through your day.
As a prayer, it is an act of worship.
But it is also a habit we can form to help center and focus ourselves.
It is based on an ancient practice of prayer that has been used for hundreds of years.
Today we use a prayer to guide us through 5 steps. 1.
Become aware of God's presence.
Find a quiet place away from distractions.
Take several minutes to breathe. As you allow your body to grow quiet, become aware of God's presence with you, now and throughout your day. You could ask yourself a question like, Where has God been at work in my life today?
Two,
Number 2,
review the day with gratitude. Take a moment to give thanks and reflect on questions like,
what are good things that have happened today? What can I be thankful for? Number 3,
3, pay attention to your emotions. Ask yourself about how you felt at different points of the day
both pleasant
and unpleasant.
You could look back at difficult moments of your day and think about where God might be at work in those challenging times.
4,
Number 4, forgive
and ask for forgiveness. Take some time to look at your day through the eyes of the people around you. Ask yourself, where can you take the first step in restoring peace?
Take a moment to reflect on where you may have missed the mark today.
Where might I need to ask for forgiveness? 5,
Number 5,
look ahead to tomorrow. As you look at tomorrow,
what do you hope will be different?
what would you like to ask God for help with?
The daily replay can be done anywhere, anytime.
Using this prayer practice day after day makes it an easy habit to turn to
when our days get challenging. Anywhere,
anytime.
All right, I need everybody to stand up for me because we're going to practice this. So I need you all to go find your own space in here, not near anyone, away from anybody who may especially distract you. Clear your lap. You don't need a Bible. I'm going to walk us through this prayer of examine. So make sure you are comfortable. You should probably be on the floor. This is going to be several minutes. So get comfortable, away from people. Boys on the level, spread out for me, por favor.
Like I always think she's you.
Yep. So grab a seat, close your eyes, and I'm going to walk us through the prayer of examine. So the prayer of examine, what this video calls the daily repay, dates back hundreds and hundreds of years. So the first step in the prayer of examine is the idea of becoming aware of God's presence in your life, in the world, in the here and the now. So I want everybody to close your eyes. There's nothing magic about closing your eyes. Closing your eyes helps eliminate distractions. And the next step is I want you to focus on your breathing. So as we do this, part of the goal of the prayer of examine is to slow down your breath, slow down your life, for you to notice God at work inside of you. So take a deep breath in and exhale through your nose. Maybe count to 3 as you inhale in and inhale out. And just slow down your heart, slow down your brain, slow down your mind so you can hear and receive from God right now. Take a few more breaths, continue to breathe, and start to ask God maybe where He's at in this moment. See if you can feel and hear and sense that God is with you in the midst of this right now, just by slowing down. And then as you do that, we transition into step number 2 of the prayer of examine. And I want us to review the day with gratitude. So just a question I want you to ask yourself as you continue breathing in and out, slowing down your heart, your body, your soul, your mind, is I want you to ask you this question for you to ask God. What are the good things that have happened to you today? What are things that you can give God thanks for? What are the good things that have happened today? And what can you give God thanks for? Now, as we transition to the next step, I just want you to pay attention to your emotions. So as you're in this process, maybe some stuff is filtering up, you're feeling some different things inside your soul about today, about the past couple of days, and I want you to ask yourself these questions to talk to God about. What moments maybe have been extremely difficult or tense for you, and why? Where is God at work in the midst of these anxious, intense moments? And what might God or anxiety be trying to tell you in the midst of all of this? And then as we transition to the next step again, forgive and ask for forgiveness. Forgive and ask for forgiveness. Who are you angry or frustrated with? Are there things you can forgive and let go of in order to have peace? And on the other side of that, what would you like to be forgiven for? Who are you angry or frustrated with? Are there things you can forgive and let go of in order to have peace? And what would you like to be forgiven for? And then now, as we transition for the sake of time to the final step in the prayer examen, I want you to start looking ahead to tomorrow. Look ahead to tomorrow, and I want you to ask God, how can tomorrow be different? How can tomorrow be different? And what would you like to ask God to help you with? Heavenly Father, I just thank you for these students in this space to slow down and encounter you. I just pray that you meet these students in the midst of their fears, their anxieties, their worry, their tension, and just continue to help them see that you are with them in their most anxious moments. That when they feel like life is crazy and spinning out of control, that you are there in the boat with them, even if the boat may seem wobbly and rocky and unsteady. I pray that you give these students confidence to have conversations with friends and trusted adults that they need to have, and just help them know that they are loved and valued and cared for in the midst of their anxiety and tension and just the chaos of the world around them. In your name we pray. Amen. So, every week we're going to practice this prayer exam in a different way as we walk through this conversation. And then every week, we're going to split into groups at the end of it. And I have, if any of you want to practice the prayer examen on your own, so you could spend a long, long time walking through these steps. For the sake of time, I got us through them rather briskly. But you could easily sit in those 5 steps for a half hour or longer as you think through your life and what God is up to. The prayer exam is just another way, like Lectio Divina, where we can break up and encounter Jesus in a different way through a different practice. That may be beneficial to some. So if you want one of those to take home with you, I have it for you. At this point, if you are a lower classman lady, find Aaron. Aaron, I have one of these for you. Just worry about page 2. If you are an upperclassman lady, fine. Ellie, the leaders, we are only paying attention to page 2 in the little sheet. And dudes, we are in here.